Today we want to talk about the re-release or the reissue of the vinyl, debut album on vinyl, and why now, why it's taken this long, and why there's a real need for it in the market. And we've got two people who couldn't be better placed to talk about that. So we've got Jeffrey Smith from Discogs, Vice President of Marketing, and we've got Brittany Benton of Brittany's Record Shop, which is a hip-hop, reggae, soul and jazz record store in Cleveland, Ohio, which coincidentally is where Tracy is from. So yeah, could I get an introduction from you guys? If we could start with Brittany.
Okay, so I got it. My name is Brittany Benton. I am a teacher, producer, DJ, shop owner. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I am the owner of Brittany's Record Shop, and I'm, just a champion for all things groovy. So dance music, hip hop, house, and and this kind of holds a special part for me because, like you said, Tracy Chapman is also a Cleveland native.
Nice. And you know thing or two about vinyl re-releases then, which you can tell us a bit about later.
Absolutely.
And Jeffrey, tell us about your work at Discogs.
Yeah, I've been the vice president of marketing now for almost 2 years. I've been at Discogs for 8 years in total. And yeah, just working within vinyl culture, the vinyl communities for a long time, and have a lot of interest, particularly in this debut from Tracy. It's been a part of a larger conversation around OG pressings and pressings that just needed to be re-released for years. So it's really cool to see all this happening today.
So are you a fan of Tracy's music then? Both of you. You followed the art work through the years on how did you find Tracy in the first instance?
I'll say, it definitely, Tracy Chapman's music was always a ecosystem, and it was always a universe that was around. But I have to be honest, it took me getting a little bit older and more socially aware to appreciate the music. Every time I listen to it, I have a deeper appreciation. When I think her first album came out in the early mid 80s. So it was like either the year right before or after I was born. So needless to say, a lot of the commentary and the discourse, I was still very much in Sesame Street land. But definitely as I kind of came towards the end of high school and college and, my young adulthood, her that first album especially kind of became a compass for like the basis of a lot of my political views as a woman, as a Black woman, and all of that. So, she's definitely, I've grown to appreciate and understand the importance of a Tracy Chapman.
Yeah. Do you know, I always say that my experience with her music is similar. I grew up in maybe a poor part of Wales, which is in the UK. And I had that. So I had the themes of growing up without very much money coming through. And then as I got older and experienced different things in life, I would pick up different layers of and depth to the music, which only became relevant when I lived it, if that makes sense. So I completely hear what you're saying there, that you may not appreciate it all at first, but it certainly comes to life as you grow and get those life experiences.
Absolutely.
How about yourself, Jeffrey?
Yeah, particularly I'll point to the Fast Car single coming out while I was a senior in high school. So that ages me a little bit here, but it's important because similar to you, Stefan, I grew up in a very small town, grew up poor, and think that particular song was more of a propellant for me to get out, right? And hearing someone else that didn't look like me telling my same story, growing up in a very close-minded culture really resonated with me, and there's several other factors around music that added to that as well, but Tracy definitely was a voice within that in that particular song.
So you mentioned there you're a little bit older than us. Do you remember the political landscape at the time with, I guess the backdrop of the 80s, and you had sort of Reaganism, I guess you had Thatcherism in the UK, and you had apartheid, South Africa going on at the time. Do you remember those things being directly connected to the themes of this music, or has that been retrofitted later by maybe reviewers and people who talk about the artwork?
Yeah, I think I think my memory is definitely adjusted through the lens of growing up and becoming an adult and knowing what was happening at the time. Again, being in a very conservative household, being in a small town where I didn't see my person of any color until I left this small town. So you're talking about 6,000 people at most, all white, all conservative. And so I think my lens is remembering it differently than probably I experienced it because, again, all I was trying to do was get out into the world. So, from the first George Bush presidency and everything else that was going on culturally, I honestly didn't know because I was in such a closed-minded culture that someone like Tracy and others were my first window into the rest of the world, right? I didn't know anything about apartheid until Little Steven did that Sun City single, and I saw it on MTV. Like, that's how uninformed I was growing up.
Yeah, and so it may have been, like you said, Brittany, an education piece to lots of political views and ideas which you would not been aware of. Brittany, you must see so many people come through your store of different ages. When have you noticed a new generation discovering this record?
Well, I would say in general, even especially in terms of vinyl, the groups go in two buckets. I'd say there's like the Gen X and Boomer bucket who remember when vinyl was a primary platform. And then there's, this new Gen Z younger millennial group that looks at vinyl now as a luxury item. And it's something that they want to use to further kind of submit their choices that they've made in the streaming world. And so I'll say with any release in general, if the students, or I say student, I'm actually at work at a high school right now, but if the young adults really believe in something that they're listening to, I think a lot of the times they look at a way to further brand themselves with the identity and to show that they really believe in the music, the message, or the musician. Vinyl is like the last stage. I have a couple students who brought up to me from this music appreciation class that I teach every Wednesday, which I will be teaching an hour. They asked if I knew about anything coming down the pike from Tracy Chapman. They've asked about stuff like Joni Mitchell. Like a lot of the women with strong voices who are commenting on social commentary, they're like, I'm always listening to it. I got a couple of my mom's records, but I want to get this once. I definitely, I think definitely with artists who have a lot more substance, I think it also goes hand in hand with people purchasing their physical format of music, because Tracy Chapman's music isn't disposable, like it's the kind of music you want to have on tape, CD, and vinyl, and 8-track if you have something to accommodate that too.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And did you appreciate the Grammys last year? You had Joni, Tracy, and Annie Lennox, who I'm a big fan of all three. And just to have those three icons of music with substance, I think was incredible.
I agree.
So, I guess it's interesting that you say that it's the end game of a self-expression of I've streamed this to death. I need to own this, and I guess that takes us on nicely to another observation that this album is ranked in sales on Discogs year on year on year on year, right? So am I right in saying that even though a ton of them would have been pressed at the time, it's still before this repressing, there's a real demand for this album. What have you seen at Discogs, Jeffrey?
Yeah, my entire time here, her debut has sat in that top 25 best-selling record list consistently. There's a lot of factors that go into that. There were, because of the album being as big as it was in the late 80s going into early 1990, there were a lot of copies made on all kinds of different formats, but the most important thing is it ended there. There wasn't a reissue there until this one that's current. It's like there wasn't an unofficial. There were even some bootlegs that popped up along the way. So you're looking at, there was close to 300 different variants of that debut release that are in our catalog from all different regions around the world. There's a few bootlegs kind of scattered in there, but it's mostly that initial pressing. And so with us, we're a good indicator of that continued popularity within the record collecting community, because we're one of the only platforms that you can find that record on, be between Discogs, eBay, and other kind of secondhand markets. Going down to your local record store quite possibly didn't scratch that itch, because they may not have a copy for sale because it's not within their distribution channel. It hasn't been reissued. So they're depending on someone coming in and selling a copy to them in order to resell it. And because we have access to shops and sellers all over the world, it's pretty easy to find and inexpensive as well, because there were so many made at the time. That rarity itch really isn't scratched there. It's available. You just need to kind of come on one of those platforms to snag your copy.
You just need to find it. There's a real community vibe on Discogs, I'd say, as well. It really feels like it's for the collector. Sometimes I go on and just browse various releases or rare releases of albums out of curiosity. I think if you're an audiophile, that's kind of, it's the perfect platform for you to dig into nuances and those little quirks of releases. I know it's where I found out there was there's a bonus track. I think it's on a Japanese version of one of Tracy's album, which isn't anywhere else, So I found that through the listings on Discogs. So it's a brilliant platform for collectors,
Yeah, I didn't know about that bonus track Japanese import. I'll have to look that one up. But yeah, it's really special to kind of comb through the notes of those releases and watch the community inform each other of, either the quality of pressing or there being a bonus track on this Japanese version that you might not known had existed. Because then the real fans get to engage with other fans and have those conversations and keep each other informed, and then really kind of looking at finding like the best version for you too. Like, I'm sure there's conversations going on about the best audio quality, like which is the best pressing, which sounds the best. And I'm sure there's debates on which format sounds the best and all of that stuff within those conversations. But what's really cool about Discogs participating kind of in the legacy of this record is that we've given a place for people to communicate about those things and find this record kind of out in the wild where they may not be able to find it at home.
Yeah. Brittany, do you have secondhand vinyls come through your store? Is it something that you regularly get asked for?
Yeah, I definitely do. I will say the Tracy Chapman secondhand doesn't pass through my store as much as I'd like to see it, especially because, like Jeff mentioned, the price point is never crazy because it was definitely mass produced in its time. So, not to the point where it's quite that Barbra Streisand and Barry Gibb record that's 5 of them in every dollar bin, but it's almost like the stuff that I get coming through. It's always a lot more heavily funk, a bunch of different cameo Isley Brothers, which is great. But I could probably say I've only had 3 secondhand copies come through the shop since I've been open in 2017. But what I will say is that they never last more than a week. People see it, grab it, and the profile of each person has been different. I believe it's everything from like a younger college age white guy to a older woman who like an older Black lady that's similar to my mom's age, but it's just like, to me, Tracy, I always thought the great thing about her music that it was a cross section of America, and like she was telling America's story despite America's company line. And it's like she poked everybody in the chest. And I think that's always kind of reflected in who comes in looking for her stuff.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you feel like living in Cleveland, there's a pride and a sense of belonging to Tracy because she comes from there?
I think she's wildly under-recognized, under-celebrated. A lot of people have no idea Tracy's from Cleveland. A lot of people say, oh, isn't she from Boston? But I believe Boston was her next stop after Cleveland. My mom, she went to the same high school as my mom. It was called South High. It no longer exists. The building is still there. Tracy was born in 1964. My mom was born in 1962. And I think it's very interesting because at that high school specifically, in the late 1970s, the Supreme Court had had to have a ruling that they had to force the integration in, I believe, 77 or 78, because a lot of municipalities were ignoring the legislation in 1964 about civil rights. So my mom, Tracy, a lot of those people in that first 5 years of that forced integration, they were, instead of going to the school that was in their neighborhood, were bused to schools in white neighborhoods and white students vice versa. So that's also a built-in experience that I feel like a lot of people kind of don't recognize, because there was a lot of racial tension at that time and people pushing back. And, you know, I asked my mom, what was it like going to school with Tracy Chapman? And I feel like the way that she described Tracy, because my mom was kind of like a cooler, laid back, she was like, oh, she was very different. She was kind of like one of those earthy, keep to herself, quiet chicks, you know? And I was like, oh, really? She was like, yeah, you know, we didn't really mix vibes or anything like that, but she kind of kept to herself. And I was just like, wow, did you guys deserve a Tracy Chapman? But I'm thinking a lot of the things that she saw in her time, I can't help but think like how it helps take the veil off a lot of the hypocrisy that she was calling out in that first album. Like, you're 14 years after the civil rights. So the civil rights legislation came down the year that she was born. And she's still being caught up in a lot of the political, logistical move around. And so, you know, I just think a lot of that really poured into her message being so potent when she had that first album.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And that she was an earthy. And you can see it though, right? She's a hippie in for lack of a better word, and a bit of a nerd. She read tons and she was very introverted. That makes total sense with what we know of Tracy now. But it's interesting that you say you mentioned the integration, because Tracy says often the songs are not autobiographical, essentially, but one is, and that's across the lines. So that literally talks about, you know, what you described and the forced integration and the riot, which started off the back of that. So it must have been crazy to live through and to have it, I guess, documented for people to hear in a wider context, because you may never know if you are not from there. So thanks for that. And
I'd like to also add that Cleveland, by many metrics, is considered, as far as major cities go, still the most segregated major city in the United States. And, you know, it's kind of what they call up south, where even though we're in the north and we've represented in Ohio a place for a lot of refuge for fugitive runaway slaves, and we're the last stop before Canadian freedom, it was still very much like we're the home of redlining, the home of the Rockefeller industrial, all of that. So a lot of the things that, even though she might not say it's autobiographical, I think she's still pulling from a rich knowledge base of not only being in a place that's still considered super segregated, but also when they're at a crux of forcing this so-called American ideal of equality and integration. And so I just wanted to add that, because a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about Cleveland, but one thing that's always still stuck out is like the east side, west side, black, white kind of divide that's always existed.
So it still exists, which I think famously she, found it really difficult to stay there because of the experiences she had in high school and beyond that. There's a song called 3,000 Miles, which talks about how she basically went to San Francisco to sort of distance herself from the memory of the experience of going through all of those things. So I think that there's a real tension between her and her upbringing there. People say online that it's potentially one of the reasons why she hasn't been nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet, because it's based there and she's moved away.
Oh, no. I will say this. As someone, and I have a great relationship with the Rock Hall and all of the amazing people there. I even know some great people on the board. There's no grudges held about regionally. I just think one thing that a lot of Clevelanders have already been happy to see, just the fact that the selections have been more diverse and a lot more open. I'm not going to lie, I don't understand why a Tracy Chapman has not been over a decade ago in the Rock, because her music was already cemented as culturally important then. But, at the same time, I think, she's been validated as a leading voice on cultural commentary and music. In a lot of other places, I feel like, just sometimes as a city, in a place, Cleveland is finally coming around, but I could easily say as a native Clevelander, born, raised, OU graduate, Cleveland didn't deserve Tracy. And Tracy couldn't have become Tracy while still in Cleveland. And I can honestly say that, you know what I'm saying? Like, not that Cleveland doesn't deserve everything that Tracy has to offer, but I don't think the mindset, because also keep in mind that we're in a region called the Rust Belt, which is kind of like a Western PA through Detroit, where we're very industrial, very blue collar. Not saying that, you know, even though we have the most theaters out of any place next to Chicago and New York, so you have this high arts, high-end level of intellectualism, tech, STEM, but that's also very stratified in terms of socioeconomic status. So a lot of the, you know, Black and white, everyday middle class and working class people weren't always going to just have ready access to it. But at the same time, like, you know, how it is in conservative working class environments, Cleveland at the same time is very much that. Yeah, it's a blue city in a red state, but, you know, we were on the precipice of a lot of that urban decay. And when things get tight, people get very stingy and conservative. You know, like I said, it just wouldn't have been the right place for her to continue to incubate her style and continue to grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, relatable, considering, you know, we move to places where we feel maybe there's more cosmopolitan, or there's more people, you know, who we can relate to. So let's talk about this current release then, this re-release. Why do we think it's happened now? I mean, one caveat I should mention is that it's the 35th anniversary version, but it's the 30th year or the 50th year. It's just, I think the Luke Combs collaboration at the Grammys was potentially the spark that set off the basically, I think what happens is her label says every year, what can we do? And she's like, nothing, leave me alone. Only whenever something comes into the public consciousness, she says, oh, well, okay, I guess this makes sense. There's a reason to do it. There's a need for this. And I've also just recently had a little spotlight in the press, and she hates the spotlight. So I think it's kind of the label get in there when they know that she's, she'll make the best of the situation. So it happened in 2015 with the greatest hits after she was on Eleno, I think it was. She performed Stand By Me. I don't know if you remember that. It was a little viral moment. So they made the best use of that. And then this time they've said, Luke Combs has had this big hit. You've performed on the Grammys. You've got a rare profile lift, so let's do something. And what has the community reaction been to this release? If we could start with Jeff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that Luke Combs moment on the Grammys was just more than a moment. I think you're looking at a lot of cultural impact, having, you know, a country musician cover a song that means something completely different than his interpretation, singing it to an audience that's getting, I just feel like it goes back to Tracy's ability to tell a story that means something different to everyone that hears it. And it just like, again, it's just ratified how special she is as an artist to be able to do something like that and definitely have her point of view. But then you be able to take it and mean something, like I said, in where I grew up, it meant something completely different to me. However, I had the same reaction, which is, I got to get out of this small town, right? No matter what. And because of that, because of the way that resonates with humans on such a different level, you've got this incredible amount of engagement that happens around her, where right after that Luke Combs performance on the Grammys, we saw a 355% increase in want list editions on Discogs. We saw almost 300% increase in sales that week of that record. Right. So people just running in and grabbing that. And the year before, we had almost 600% increase in want list editions just across the year. Right. Just after that Grammy appearance. It's a massive amount of sales spike of a record that was already selling incredibly well. Right. So again, across cultures, across regions, across different human beings, like how that performance, how that record resonates is incredibly powerful to just drive that much momentum. Now, as far as why now, outside of that moment, I've been privileged to, and I've always kept an eye on this record because I've always thought it was interesting how it just continually sat in our top selling list and question why. It's incredibly curious why. And talking to various people in the industry that are at the label, or are sitting there with the responsibility of creating reissues within that ecosystem, and it was constantly the same. She doesn't want to do it, and I think her being in control of her narrative and being reclusive and not wanting the spotlight and all of those things. It's like, if she were a different person, it would have been a reissue on the 25th anniversary or, some other anniversary just to make a money grab. And I hope that and think that she's just like, it's all more important than that to her. Right. And I do think that would love to ask her if just because of the Luke Combs success and it being in a different genre and knowing it's resonating with a completely different audience, if that's not kind of, again, the propellant that pushed her over the edge to go, okay, it's time to get, a new version of this record out.
Yeah, I think, that's likely. It makes sense to me. She's one of those people who wants the artwork to, not the artwork, sorry, the music to remain as intended, right? So that's why she doesn't allow samples, famously. Nicki Minaj learned that the hard way.
I was just about to say that.
So it's interesting that it's got no new tracks, because we know this. She writes and records all the time. They could have put on a new version with that duet potentially from the Grammys for a digital release, but it's very much, this is as it was. I think it's been taken from an analog master, and that's been to some degree a question online because it was supposed to be the first fully digital recording. But in any case, it's as it was and it's not been changed. The only thing that is different is we've got these colorways, or these unique, specific color coordination releases for different indie releases or indie stores. I wonder if you could talk to that, Brittany. Is that common to get multiple exclusives for different stores? And
well, those colorways and variants help the independent shops because they're exclusively available there. So for a lot of people who are in the collector community, if you want to go to like a big box, like a Barnes and Nobles, or you're getting it from Walmart or FYE, they'll have the standard one. But say you're like, I really want that orange colorway or this type of, maybe there's an added, whether it's stickers or some artwork. That extra little bit sometimes can help give the little guy, and not all indies are little guys, let me be real, just that the independent shop that edge, because sometimes, we can't compete in terms of price without cutting our arm and leg off. So, what we can do is try and offer a different value proposition. Say, hey, you can get this. This is automatically collectible. That is usually limited, so it can help over time hold some of its value. And the beauty of physicals, especially vinyl, is it's pretty to look at. So it's just adding a little bit all over. Plus, also, I forgot what the stat was. Still, over half of the people who buy vinyl don't have turntables. So some people even use it as a showpiece. So it even kind of opens us up to an audience that might be buying records, but not necessarily even buying them to listen to them. But all of those different reasons add up to something that can add towards the bottom line. And, in the way that, commerce is, any little edge you can get can help, because the big boxes and the giants like the Amazons and whatnot are getting bigger and bigger. And the games they play with price are getting more and more devious.
Yeah, and Stefan, I think it's important to add there is that there are all types of people that collect records for a variety of reasons. What Brittany was speaking to about turntable owners, there undoubtedly are people that have records in their home that don't have anything to play it on. And they're choosing to buy a record because they're showing their love to an artist, or they think it's pretty, or they hang it on their wall, or it's just a collectible to them. But then there are others that are like shouting with joy that these are being taken from the analog masters because they're going to get an audiophile quality and it might sound better than the original pressing. Because let's be honest, records that were pressed in the late 80s weren't really, they didn't have quality in mind when they were pressing those records, right? You know, across the spectrum of reasons why to collect, all of these different variants mean something different depending on kind of the lens you're looking through too. Indie retailers need that traffic to come in, and they undoubtedly are going to come in and buy this Tracy record. And the smart shop owners are going to go, hey, you know what else you would like if you really like that record? And they're going to leave with more than that record. It's going to impact it greatly. Whereas if you're running in to buy it from Target, sales associate isn't going to come up and be like, oh, while you're buying that Tracy record, you should also buy this one. You know, it's a different experience. I think the music industry as a whole is caught up to the fact that we need to deliver different physical product for different reasons, and that's part of it.
Right, that makes sense. And do buyers strongly differentiate between an original pressing and a reissue? Because you said there that this one might sound better than the original, but is there still a love for that?
So it's one of these things where there are some collectors that are just straight up OG copy, like the original pressing, or nothing at all. Like they want that original pressing. There are others that want the best sounding record that they can find. I am currently going through this journey with Jeff Buckley's Grace, trying to find a better sounding version than the one that I have, because mine's awful. And then the debate about which one sounds the best, I'm sure, is going through with Tracy's pressings as well. So, and then you've got just the everyday average human being that just wants a copy of the record and they don't care, right? Mm-hmm. And those are more predominant. But the debates on first pressings from different regions and different pressing plants, even though they're from the same, let's say, country in the EU, there are different plants depending on the workload of that plant. This record might have been pressed at one for the first half of the year and another the second half of the year, but still have the same matrix and the run out groove. But people have found out which plant and swear that the second version of that sounds better because it was pressed at this plant and not this plant. It's just,
so people are very into it.
It's almost like, I liken it to conspiracy theorists, it's that same passion for that story, and they start believing it. And it could be true or it could not be true. It just depends on the lens. But it's there are some collectors out there that are just on a mission, and it's their own mission to find whatever version of that record it is. That again is most important to them.
Right.
Brittany, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I'd say from the shop owner perspective, and I hate making this about age, but 9 out of 10 people who usually care about, is this original, is it not, are usually, I'd say, the older crowd. So I'd say a lot of the Gen X and up, because one of the big excuses, I wanted to sound like when I first had this record before I sold it and got cassettes, before I sold it and got CDs. And, and then there's some people, there's a small contingent of young people whose dad is that guy who wants the audiophile or the OG version. So that's how they start looking at how they want to dig. But I'd say most of my younger buyers, if they don't have to, they'll buy the new one because it comes with maybe the add-ons, the colorway. And a lot of people, they might not look at it as, well, I'd say the young person who's cool with thrifting their clothes will definitely always prefer to get the older or low-cost version. But then there's the young person who's new to vinyl and is representing that new demographic where it's a luxury item, that buying a record that's used and not rare is like buying somebody else's old socks. You know what I'm saying? And they're just like, why would I do that? It was in somebody's house. I can smell the cigarette smoke in the sleeve, or it smells like basement. I'm like, that's fine, but look at the disc. It's clean. Stuff that would get somebody like me excited. They're like, no. So it's, like I say, it's definitely, I could see the age demographic that kind of influences that decision. But also, like I said, with the different age demographic was a different place that the person held in vinyl culture. I could say you wouldn't call it vinyl culture in the 70s and 80s. It was just listening to music. Today it's vinyl culture because listening to vinyl is a choice.
Right. Yeah. Yes. That all makes perfect sense. I would love to know your opinions on if this works, will we see, Tracy depending, re-releases of discography? So Crossroads, Matters of the Heart, I think that was the last album pressed on vinyl originally. But, you know, could we see that? Is that a trend that you see with our artists when they open the floodgates to re-releases? Does the discography follow usually?
I would imagine the conversation has been had with her at this point is if they open this up for the debut, that there's a plan for the rest of the discography. I'll point to a similar artist, PJ Harvey. When those reissues started coming out on her catalog, there was a plan for the entirety of the catalog to come out, along with demo recordings. And she as well had been pretty reticent about going back and revisiting. I know that what I had heard is the conversation was, I'm not interested in revisiting the past. I only want to move forward. At some point, there was a tipping point where it happened, reissues came out, and I was very upset about spending hundreds of dollars on original pressings of the catalog, and the reissues sound better. Point is, I'm sure that the labels had those conversations going. If we do this, let's make sure we've got a plan to capitalize on the rest of it. Now, whether or not, like you said, notorious about not using samples. Also, she's been notorious about not using any of her music in film or commercials or anything like that. This very well could be a one-off for her. Like, I guess we'll never know until, you know, more news comes out about the rest of the catalog. But it also wouldn't surprise me. It's like, you know what? There was a moment, it's time, and we may not hear from her again after this. It's kind of like, who knows?
You said PJ Harvey said, I'm not looking back, I'm only looking forward. I wish Tracy would look forward. One new album would be good. It would be an interesting question, I guess, for you then. I don't know what compels her, but if she released a new album last year, would a vinyl edition of that perform in this?
Oh, can I jump in right on that one? Like, cause you know where we are. You know what year, what season, how many days we're into this new administration. Year.
Yes.
I mean, the thing that makes, so just to kind of answer that, to kind of tie back into something Jeff said earlier, like wondering why her album is always in the top 25 in terms of sales. It's for the same reason that Legend by Bob Marley is always at the top of everybody's, you know, like when you're that artist that's usually the mainstream, you know, because Bob Marley's music didn't get super successful because only Black Jamaicans pushed it. And Tracy's music she's saying a lot of stuff that people were saying in the soul, funk movement, all types of, from the Harlem Renaissance. Black folks been saying a lot of this all the time, but she was able to take it in the folk framework that was very accessible to everyone and shown that a lot of these problems that, even though we have a company line, America, the macro representation, she told stories she atomized it into individual stories of the people. Some of them were raced because we were talking about racism, but these people were faceless. It could be anybody's auntie, sister, mom. Like when I think of Behind the Wall, you know what I'm saying? That really speaks to like the domestic violence situation. And that wasn't raced at all. It really talked about a lot of the contention that people had with law enforcement. When she's talking about Across the Tracks, the issue of segregation, for example, like if America says one thing or any of these Western or advanced progressive places are professing all of these tenets of just humanity, but not really enacting it, you're going to revisit it every time. And right now, if I told you what was going on in the United States, it's not much different from apartheid South Africa, 1950s America, or even, shall I say, late 30s, early 40s, Germany, Austria, Europe, all of that. We're hearing a lot of these things continue to revisit themselves. And I think her music being so universal, like, you know, you might not get a white kid in middle America listening to some heavy Parliament or listening to even like at the time, whoever was doing heavy social like commentary. It might be foreign to them, but she made it so accessible. Like a lot of the pushback that people got with Kendrick Lamar in the protest was his message was obvious, but it was too Black. But Tracy Chapman is saying the same thing, but she did it in the girl with guitar format. And in that first album, I think it's very intentional that there's really no percussion up until, I want to say, 2/3 in. And it's almost like the building of the pressure and pressure before something happens. So it almost feels like this place, America or whatever, is going to blow soon. You know, it's like the warnings, you know, that she's telling us. We don't hear a drum until like track 7 or 8. And the thing is like she was telling us, and it makes it super accessible. It wasn't like too rhythmic, too black, too many drums, too much jargon, too much of that. It was just very accessible, and everybody can get into it. Everybody could put themselves in that story. So I think that, you know, we're going to see it perform extremely well, and possibly factoring in the political and now economic climate that's tied into it, that she's going to be speaking to a whole new generation of people who's trying to find a place for themselves in a country that's given them so many promises, and the mask is completely off at this point.
I'm going to find it hard to add something valuable to what Brittany just said, because I love having conversations with Brittany involved. I learn something new and feel something new every time. But I want to get down to it's music connects all of us. And under this tension that we're feeling today, and as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, we're going to turn to storytellers to either break us free of that or have us feel some sort of comfort within it. And you can look at Tracy, you can look at Kendrick's halftime show, right? And go and look at the people that didn't understand what was going on during that 20-minute window where everyone is watching, the world is watching. I hope we see more and more and more of that, because that's the connective tissue that we all need to resist, right? And voices like Tracy are going to be more and more important as we're kind of on this journey, not only as a country, as the United States, but as the world connects to us as well.
I think that's both beautifully put. And, you know, we wait with the same optimism, the same blind hope that she does come back. But in the meantime, if we don't get a new album, we can revisit this one on April the 4th and, you know, take another new layer from that meaning in the context of what's going on right now. I think that's a perfect place to close. But before we go, please let us know where we can find your store, Brittany, and Jeff, you tell us where we can access your.
So the main spot to find my shop is Brittany'sRecordShop.com. Right now, I'm currently in the process of moving the brick and mortar. I look forward to announcing the reopening probably sometime between I want to say May-ish, June-ish, but I'm still active online, still active definitely on Discogs, but also social media-wise, I'm very active on Instagram. So if you want to follow me at Brittany's Record Shop, anything, if you just type Brittany's Record Shop, BRITTANY, you can just access everything I got going on. But like I said, if you want to find out when the new reopening location is under wraps right now, just follow me on Instagram and I'll keep you in the loop.
Yep. And for us, it's pretty simple. It's discogs.com. It's DISCOGS. Through whatever social channel you prefer, we are there. And in whatever app store, we are there as well. So it's DISCOGS. That's Discogs.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I can't wait to see how this turns out. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.